meeting of 2025 for the Economy and Fair Work Committee. Today, the committee will be continuing its pre-budget scrutiny and hearing evidence from the Scottish National Investment Bank. However, before we proceed, I would just like to, first of all, intimate that we have apologies from the Deputy Convener, Michelle Thompson, from Willie Coffey and from Lorna Slater. So while the committee is smaller in number, I'm sure we'll have just as many questions. I would also like to refer members to papers 1 and 2 in their packs and invite members to agree to take agendas items 2 and 3 in private. And that may also afford us the opportunity to discuss recent urgent questions and responses from the Minister regarding the transient visitor levy. Given that we have agreement on that, now move on to agenda item 1, which is our pre-budget scrutiny with the Scottish National Investment Bank. And we're joined today by Willie Watt, who is the Chair, and Michael Robertson, who is the Chief Financial Officer. I wondered if I might begin by opening up questions, asking you about financial sustainability. So obviously, in the most recent year that we have reports, there was an operating income of £34.5 million, with operating costs of just over £16 million, but with significant write-offs. I just really want to understand what the bank's plan is to meet financial sustainability, so that actually, rather than just simply operating profit, that you're making a net profit, because surely that is ultimately the aim of the bank.
Convener, would it be okay if I made an opening statement before we went to the questions?
Surely.
It's
if
very
you
short.
keep it brief, yes.
It's very short, and then I'll hand the question. I'll let Michael have a first go at that question, and then I'll probably come in. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, committee members. Since we last met at the committee, it's been a busy year with lots of things happening. Today we've got a portfolio of 43 businesses with £790 million of funding committed to those businesses, and we've crowded in £1.4 billion of third-party money. January of this year, we were given FCA accreditation, which I think is an important milestone. We also received a report from Audit Scotland concluding that the bank's governance and internal processes had been developed to a high standard. And we've made limited progress with Financial Flex, with the ability to act as a perpetual fund for the bank still as our key objective, and we'll speak more about that in response to questions, I'm sure, later on in the session. Economic conditions have been very challenging, as the committee will be aware from its other activities. We've got a busy pipeline of opportunities, but in net zero, we're seeing significant sliding rightwards into the future of economic activity to do with net zero, which is causing us some thoughtfulness. And we're also seeing a lack of co-investor appetite, which I think is to do more with concerns around economic growth and economic stability in the broader economy. So for businesses, including our investee companies, it is difficult to deliver their growth plans and to raise capital. Convener, you've mentioned sustainability, and we have had 2 loss events during the year, which we will no doubt talk to the committee about during this discussion. And whilst development banks are always going to lose money, it's unfortunate and very upsetting for the employees and for the businesses that do not succeed. And it's something that we take very seriously as a development bank. We see housing as an important part of our place mission, and we are seeing a significant uptake in interesting opportunities in housing, and that's something else we'd quite like to talk about. And finally, I'd like to apologise on behalf of Al Denham, our CEO, who announced his retirement in April of this year. Unfortunately, he has a long-standing commitment that he couldn't be with us today. We've been grateful for his leadership, and we wish him well going forward. We're at the final stages of CEO recruitment, and we expect to make an announcement on that in due course. We remain hugely ambitious for what the bank can deliver for the people of Scotland and the positive impacts we make, and we look forward to this discussion this morning. Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener, for the question as well. I mean, in terms of the result last year, you're right. The income we were, pleased to see grow year on year from the previous year to that 34.5 million number, which does cover our operational costs, and that's partly as a result of building a mixed portfolio, so having debt, equity, and funds within there, and having yield coming through in our income lines. So we are seeing that progress each year with deployment of capital. I think in terms of the unrealised loss that you mentioned, so 77 million was booked as an unrealised loss last year. That is a point-in-time valuation. We carry out a valuation 4 times a year, and the 76 represents, an individual valuation on all of the portfolio companies that we invested in, amalgamated up to that number that you quote for last year as a full year. So, as Willie mentioned, allied to that unrealised loss, there have been 2 subsequent losses in the financial year that we're in, and we would hope to initially fund those losses essentially from budget cover from our own resource surplus. But we're also acknowledging that in the early years that might not always be possible.
So, I mean, I think we're going to get into that with subsequent questions. I mean, my question really is about when will we get to a point, or is it the plan to get to a point where essentially the bank stands on its own 2 feet, or is it the case that the bank is going to require ongoing capital injections or financial interventions from government to carry on operating? What is the sort of the forward plan? What does sustainability look like for the Scottish National Investment Bank?
The bank has a commitment from the Scottish Government of 2 billion funding over the first 10 years of its life. And we don't see any threat to that commitment. We think that we can build a portfolio during that 10-year period that will produce a positive net return on capital. We've modelled that. The portfolio life at the moment has an average life of less than 3 years for each investment, and many of the investments that we make will not start yielding profits themselves for a considerable amount of time. For example, the Port of Ardeshir, where the first few years of its life is about digging foundations, pouring concrete, creating infrastructure. The same would be true of quite a number of other of our activities. So positive net returns will inevitably be back-end loaded within that 10-year period, but we certainly envisage making a positive return on capital.
Critically, at what point is the bank planning to be self-sustaining? So, I mean, I understand that. We're all familiar with the £2 billion commitment over 10 years, but circumstances change, government priorities change. And while that commitment is there, and I think it's broadly got cross-party commitment, what if that funding was to stop today, you'd have a problem. At what point does the bank cease to have a problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to be specific, convener. I think there's a number of things going on here. We're already self-sustaining on the basis that our revenue from our investments more than covers our operating costs. So on that definition of self-sustaining, we are self-sustaining, and we think we will continue to be so. The issue of self-sustainability then has two other elements. One is the supply of capital, and at the moment that capital only comes from the Scottish Government. So, to broaden sustainability of capital, we would need to raise third-party capital from outside of government, and for that we need to have FCA accreditation and a track record. We have the first phase of accreditation, we need the second phase, and then we need to bring in that third-party capital. So that is a job for the next year or two, and that would definitely increase our self-sustainability. The third component of self-sustainability is the ability to become a perpetual institution, because at the moment, if we have returned capital from our investments, it goes back to the Scottish Government, and we then cannot recycle that to be sustainable. Sure. And as you've pointed out, if we have a loss on an investment, then that has to be written off against the government's balance sheet rather than wholly against ours. So just, sorry, one more sentence, if I may. The complete answer to your question is we would need that perpetual capital issue to be resolved. Sure. Before we'd be completely self-sustainable.
So look, I mean, I understand you don't necessarily have complete foresight in terms of what will happen with your portfolio. There are a number of other things that you need to have in place. Yeah. I get all of that, but I'm still not entirely clear on what is the plan. If all of those things happen, when will the bank be self-sustaining? Do you have that plan? Do you have a kind of a target date?
Well, yes. I mean, I think
you don't sound entirely sure.
Well, because the difficulty is, some of these things are not within my control. We are talking
That's different to having a. They're not, and I accept that, but you must have a plan, surely.
We have plans. We publish 3-year business plans. We make assumptions about loss rates in those plans. We make assumptions about the growth in revenue. We make assumptions about how many investments that we make within that period, and all of that comes together in our long-term planning. And of course, that's linked to the $2 billion over 10 years. In terms of third-party capital, I don't think it would be prudent to set a hard and fast date for that, because I don't think we're at the point yet where we're 100% confident that we can deliver that. Okay. I'm just being honest with you. And then with regard to perpetual capital, a hell of a lot's happened in the last year, which we can go into in more detail. And I think there is I think we have an expectation that could be resolved within the next 12 months if the Scottish Government and the UK Government and the bank can work effectively together to make that happen. But as I go back to what I said right at the start, we fully anticipate within that 10-year period that we will be making a positive capital return of between 3% and 4% on our portfolio, which at that point will be $2 billion. So our expectation would be that we'd be making capital profits of 30 to 60 million towards the back end of that period. So in that sense, we'd be self-sustaining in terms of making a capital profit. But we need these other moving parts to be resolved before the recycling of capital could be self-sustaining. Long-winded, but
so the other key issue that, as I sort of have been reading through our briefing documents, is around Treasury rules, and that has been flagged as being an issue.
Yeah.
Could you just briefly set out what those are, and also explain that you're not unique in terms of there's a number of other bodies within certainly the UK government, such as National Wealth Fund, GB Energy, or ones in the past, such as the Green Investment Bank, and they've obviously operated within the same Treasury rules. Could you just maybe explain why there are particular issues for you and why they are different to other bodies and organisations and institutions that
I'll
exist
let
in the
Michael
same
kick
space?
off on that one, and then I'll chip in.
So, I mean, in terms of the framework that we operate within, Perpetual is something that we're seeking to allow us that ability to recycle capital and returns, as Willie has mentioned, and potentially that ability to carry over resource surplus from, say, last year into this year to help absorb realised losses. We found it quite helpful. In October last year, there was a public financial institution paper published by HMT, and that covered a framework for those in receipt of financial transactions, which the bank ultimately is. That's where the bulk of our investment funding comes from. So the PUFIN, Public Financial Institution, shortened to PUFIN, there is an annexed list within that of UK institutions, so NWF, British Business Bank are on that list. And it affords organisations that meet certain criteria, and it tends to be patient capital investing, not investing in any one loss-making product right at the outset, and the ability to demonstrate a return on investment. Those would be the main criteria that the framework would list. So we are working through with HMT, also with the support of Scottish Government, how we see the bank meeting those criteria. And also we're currently on a working group, or have been invited onto a working group with HMT representatives just to hear and contribute to some of the challenges with the adoption of that PUFIN framework. So there's a bit to work through. There is also a challenge with Scottish Government that if PUFIN was to be overlaid into Scotland as well, with the bank's main shareholder being Scottish Government, there would have to be a mechanism to allow PUFINs to operate within the Scottish landscape as well.
Can I maybe add to that? We meet all the criteria that have been set by the Treasury. So in that sense, we're in exactly the same position as the National Wealth Fund. The added complexity is the devolution settlement, because we're not directly managed by the Treasury, which the National Wealth Fund is. The Scottish Government is supportive of our wish to see perpetual capital status in the same way as the National Wealth Fund is seeking it. Being on this working group is incredibly important. So we're very pleased we've made that sort of progress. I met with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, the previous Chief Secretary, about 3 or 4 months ago, and he was incredibly helpful in getting us into that. So the UK Government sees the benefit of the bank being in that framework. The Scottish Government sees the benefit of the bank being in that framework. What we now need to do is work through the complexities of the devolution settlement to make sure that we can make that a reality.
So the short answer is we need to devolution-proof the approach that's coming forward for PUFIN.
Yeah.
Good. That's really helpful. And I think given that we've touched on the losses, Murdo Fraser was, I think, going to ask questions in that area. So I'm going to, if colleagues will bear with me, I think just slightly rejig the order that we agreed. But if we could go to Murdo Fraser so he could delve into that.
Great.
Murdo.
Okay, thanks. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I was looking at your accounts. You made 785 million since your launch in investments, and the accounts report an unrealised loss of 76.9 million, which is, well, more or less 10%. I entirely appreciate the business you're in. There will be losses, but is 10%, in your view, a reasonable sum, given where the bank is?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think what are the factors here? I think an early stage private sector investor would expect to have a loss rate, because I think doing the kind of things that we're doing, you would expect in the private sector to lose money. And in fact, in 2 out of the 3 companies that have failed during the first 5 years of the bank's existence, there have been private sector investors who have lost money alongside the bank. So a loss rate is certainly to be expected. We're a development bank, so logically speaking, our loss rate ought to be higher than the private sector, because we're there to take more risk than the private sector, and we're there to get other impacts that the private sector wouldn't seek. And then the third element is that the economic conditions that we're in have been exceptionally challenging. And so I would rather not see that £77 million provision number. But I don't think it's unexpected given where we are. The other thing to say about it is that it's a paper loss which we've written down against our investments. Now, we would expect some of those investments to actually improve their performance, and those provisions against those companies to come off. But of course, in the future, there may be other companies that add to that list. So I would prefer it if it was a smaller number, but I think, given what I've said, it's not an unreasonable number at this point.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for putting that into context. So let me ask you about a couple of the specifics, because we've got satellite and digital connectivity firm Crucial. That's got a provision 4.6 million loss. M Squared Lasers, £34 million investment. Much of that might be lost. We previously, of course, had Circularity Scotland. What lessons have been learned from this? Is there anything you can do better in future to avoid this?
Undoubtedly, there are lessons to be learned from the first few years of the bank's existence. I mean, we were a start-up with a start-up team trying to find our place in the financial and economic ecosystem of Scotland. What kind of lessons have we learned?
Well, can I just interrupt you for a second? Because I think you said it's quite interesting. Because when the bank was set up, given a chunk of taxpayer money to invest, do you think there was political pressure on the bank to get that money out the door, to invest, to be seen to be engaging in the Scottish economy, and perhaps with hindsight, some of these investments might have needed more careful consideration?
There's never been political pressure in the sense of ministers or officials ringing up the bank saying, you better get the money out the bloody door. I think there was an expectation in Civic and Business Scotland that we should deploy the capital that we'd been allocated. And we probably had internal pressures that we felt we should be deploying the. So, but we've always resisted that, and there have been quite a number of years where we haven't deployed the capital we've been allocated, and we've been criticised for it. So it's always a challenge to balance the will to commit capital with the quality threshold that we've set. So going back to the start of your question, I think we've become tougher on the level of technical complexity not the right word, the level of the technology in terms of its development at which we invest. So we want now to invest where the technology risk has been lessened. I think we've increased our focus on the breadth and depth of management teams, and we've also reflected on the need to invest with partners who are capable of following their money in the same way that we can follow ours. And I think we believe that it's not the right place for the bank to be the only major investor in some of these companies. So we are, we are learning. Those are some of the learnings. On every company that fails, we will do a specific piece of work on that company, and those pieces of work in 2 of the 3 cases are ongoing at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. That's very helpful to put that into context. Can I ask you about another specific investment? And it's an issue that's been raised with committee members.
Yeah.
And this is an investment you made in Gresham House Forestry Growth and Sustainability Fund. And we've had communication from the Lillies Leaf, Ashkirk and Midland Community Council and the Borders, who are very concerned because Gresham House have acquired this estate, which is Todrig and Whitslade, which is currently biodiverse moorland, planning to plant large numbers of Sitka spruce, which their concern is that will have a negative impact on biodiversity. And I believe that Gresham House have received £50 million investment from SNIB. Given that your remit is to help the environment, do you think that's a reasonable investment?
Well, firstly, I'm personally not aware of the issue that group have raised with you, and I would encourage them to get in touch with us directly and share their concerns, because we'd be happy to engage on that. The reason we got involved with the Gresham Trust Fund was that it was a different type of forestry fund from what had been done by Gresham or indeed other investors in the past, in that it had a larger percentage of native species. And so the plan was to build something that would be commercial, but would also have a more balanced woodland flora and fauna. And that was the reason why they needed the help of a development bank, because there were less Sitka and more Scots pine, birch, rowan, etc. So that was one issue. I think the other reason for investing in this is that Scotland needs more tree cover. It has one of the lowest tree covers of any country in Europe. And whilst there are definitely biodiverse moorlands, there are also moorlands that are devoid of much biodiversity at all because of burning and other practices. So I we would see forestry as being part of biodiversity in Scotland, and it's our expectation that Gresham should be building out, if that's the right word, planting out their forests in conjunction with local communities, working with those communities and coming up with solutions that those communities are in tune with. So I would be interested to talk to that group.
Okay, well we can pass that on. And I mean, I was looking at Gresham House, who I've met.
Yeah.
You know, #1 commercial forestry planter in the UK. Assets under management as of December last year of 8.7 billion.
Yeah.
Their ambition is to grow their asset under management base by 2030 to 200 billion.
Yeah.
Why do they need 50 million in taxpayers' money?
It was because of the nature of the high level of native species. Because the more non-commercial trees you plant, the less the returns.
Okay.
So I can't remember exactly how big the fund is. It's 250, something like that. And in it are basically ourselves, mainly local authority pension schemes and us. Yeah. And so we were the cornerstone to help them raise the rest. So it's, you know, Gresham has got a bit of a bad reputation because quite a lot of their investment is tax driven. But this fund is much more about, you know, about us and pension funds investing in forests.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Well, I'm sure.
It's 300.
Yeah. I'm sure the community can follow that up.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question, Convener, on a separate topic? Because I was interested. You mentioned housing, which is very timely because Parliament is sitting late this week, as we know, because we're all weary this morning dealing with the housing bill. You said you had investor interest in housing. Is that in the build to rent sector, or what sectors is that in?
It's in multiple tenures. I think we've been engaged with the Scottish Government, political parties, local authorities, developers, and house builders, and we have done a lot of work on what we think is wrong with the sector, and we have. We're now working on a number of different types of work. So to give you some examples of the kind of things we're looking at the moment, we're looking at developing with a local authority and an international investment company a big brownfield mixed tenure site in one of our major cities. We're working with local authorities and house builders in rural areas close to major net zero developments to try and build more houses for workers in rural and semi-rural areas. We're working with a major bank on a scheme to help finance small builders, small developers. You know, one of the things that's happened over the last few years is the number of independent builders in Scotland has gone through the floor. A lot have retired. So we're working on a scheme to help them to develop smaller sites. So those are a kind of range of things that we're doing. And we hope to make some announcements on that. We very much welcome the housing bill. We think that the previous, constraints on rental really made Scotland unattractive as a place to build buy-to-rent accommodation and other tenures. And so we welcome the changes that are in the bill. And we think that will make a significant difference. And we want to get behind this kind of push on housing because it works for our place mission.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks very much.
hand floor to Stephen Kerr.
On that theme, I mean, how important is additionality to the role of the bank? I mean, and in what respect is the bank fulfilling that aspect of its role when it comes to housing? I'm not clear.
Yeah, well, I think if you try to take a step back, I mean, we've clearly got a problem with housing in the sense that we're not building enough.
Yeah.
So, and the private sector has been absent, partly because of the rental issue, and partly, I think, because the infrastructure, the housing infrastructure in Scotland has been less positive to working with the private sector. So what we're trying to do is bring the private sector back into big developments in Scotland. And the kind of brownfield developments that I mentioned to Mr Fraser are ones where they probably wouldn't happen without our involvement, because the economics of the sites and the ability to bring together the private and the public sector, we don't think would happen if we weren't there as a catalyst to that.
But that's because of the business environment, isn't it? It's not. I mean, there are developments on brownfield sites happening.
Yeah, and
across the UK,
and we will not get involved with those if they're going to happen without our capital.
But the problem is the business environment's not right for the private investors. That's what you're saying.
Well, it hasn't been.
What's going to change?
Well, I think the housing bill will change, and I think that the willingness of local authorities to work with private developers is changing, and we can be a catalyst for that. But look, there'll be lots and lots of housing developments in Scotland that we've got nothing to do with at all, and we will only get involved in those where we think that we can be a catalyst and as you say, produce additionality.
Yeah.
And one of the things, we have a team in the bank that looks at that additionality in every investment we make, because you know, we're not there to compete with the private sector, you know, and we don't have enough capital to do that. Sure. So we have to make sure that where we're investing, it is additive, and we test ourselves on that. And
I'm just checking that
yeah.
the bank isn't doing something to compensate for the lack of attractiveness for private investors to operate in that space.
Yeah.
Because of things that we are doing, economic things, political things.
Yeah.
But you are convinced that the bank is providing additional.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't happen if the bank wasn't involved.
Yeah.
And the housing bill, you believe, is going to bring a wave of new private investment, is it?
No.
Okay. Right. Fair enough.
But I think it will definitely help.
Right.
And I think it is very much to be welcomed.
All right. I wanted also to circle back to what was very interesting in what you said about the NDBP and non-departmental public. It's easier to say the actual name than it is the initials sometimes. The non-departmental public bodies restrictions from the Treasury, and you mentioned very interestingly this working group, that you've been invited by HMT to be involved in. Who else is on the group, and what's its remit, and what's the expectation in terms of an outcome from the work of the group?
So in terms of the other members of the group, it is in the main the listed bodies that were in the annex. So NWF, British Business Bank, I think Homes England are on that list as well. And it's really to the Puffin framework was just that. It was a framework and in some regards, you know, a series of principles effectively that are requiring to be worked through as to how the individual organisations demonstrate you know, various compliance with that framework. So there's approaches to you know, measurement of risk in the portfolio, for example. Theoretical economic capital is an area that we are that we're working through in addition.
So, but what's going to be the output of the working group? Because you're identifying hurdles that, or tests that you need to pass. So the framework already exists, it seems, to get past these Treasury rules. Is that right? So what is the working group, what's it going to achieve?
So it should achieve effectively the ability to recycle and act as a perpetual investor.
So get past the Treasury rules in effect.
So
Sorry, let me. The Treasury want to change the rules effectively because they've created development banks, and they want those development banks to operate as development banks, but the public accounting rules don't actually allow any of us to do that. So
you're on the balance sheet. That's the problem, isn't it?
So they exactly. So what we as development bank are interested in is the ability to recycle. What the Treasury is interested in is how much of this capital is on the Treasury's balance sheet and what risk level is it at. So the working group is quite technical around how to effectively characterise the risk profile of what development banks in the UK are doing, and to come up with effectively a one-size-fits-all model that would work for the Scottish National Investment Bank and Homes England, for example.
And is there an international model that we can draw? I mean, for example, the Germans have mastered this, haven't they? Can we learn something from the Germans about how to have a national investment bank?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm not sufficiently aware of what public accounting in Germany looks like for the KfW, I guess,
yes,
what you're referring to.
It's off the national balance sheet, basically.
I think the longer you've been around, the more chance you've got to be off the balance sheet, because you then are completely self-sustaining.
Yeah.
It's back to the convener's opening question. And the KfW, which has been in existence for more than 40 years, is completely self-sustaining, which is why it's off the balance sheet. But because all of our development banks have been launched in the last, I don't know, 5 or I think the BBB was the first one. And the convener was asking about the green investment. Part of the reason that it was privatised was because they didn't want to have it on the government's balance sheet. So basically it's about working through the balance sheet rules. And then the final point I'd say is that financial transactions have been used by government departments, including the Scottish Government, to do all kinds of things, like build schools and hospitals. And the Treasury wants to shrink the use of financial transactions to development banks, pretty much.
So we should see some progress.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, very good. I want to ask you about the health of the organisation, because we're about to have, I think, our 4th CEO in 5 years.
Yeah,
it's like the Aberdeen and Hibs of leadership roles, isn't it? Sorry, Kevin.
Hibs
it's too tempting to miss the chance to say that, because what does this do? This rotation, constant rotation of CEO, which in most organisations would be seen as a negative, frankly. What does it do in terms of strategic continuity, staff morale, and of course external confidence, because the face of the organisation keeps changing?
Well, I mean, our first CEO was in place for 2 years, and she joined a year before the bank was founded to set it up. So her job was effectively to set up the bank, which I think she did very effectively. We then had a year when we had an interim CEO because we were trying to recruit a new CEO. Al's been with us for 2.5 years. So that's the way I would kind of describe that journey. So it's not been a journey of kind of knee-jerk reactions or things not working out. It's been a programme of growth in the organisation leading to the point that we're at now. The Auditor General was Auditor General's office, and their report, I think, was very positive about the controls and the processes and procedures that ran the bank. And I think that is a testament to the hard work of the team, and I think does not reflect a a crisis of leadership. I think the continuity of the board during that 5-year period has been almost complete, and that has added a lot to the team. And we were very pleased to be rated as one of Scotland's best places to work in the Sunday Times survey that came out, which was all third-party audited. So I think we're in a good place. I think the skills that are needed to start up a bank are different from those that are needed to run it once it's already in operation. And Al's retirement gives us an opportunity to, if you like, calibrate what we need from a chief executive to where the bank is now after being around for 5 years. We'll write to the committee once we can tell you who our new chief executive is. But that person, I think, will have the right skills to take the bank forward, right up to the end of the 10-year first founding period for the bank.
Well, you've done an impressive job of trying to convince us that having 4 CEOs in 5 years is actually a good thing.
Well, 3.
I suggest there must be some downside to that kind of rotation of senior leader.
Yes. I mean, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that despite the fact that there's been change,
There's been continuity as well.
I don't think it's held the organisation back.
Okay.
Would I have preferred, to have had, 2 rather than 3 CEOs during the first 5 years? I think the answer to that would be yes.
Of course. A quick question about the Ministerial Advisory Group.
Yeah.
Is that an encroachment on the independence of SNP? What useful purpose does that play?
It's not an encroachment. It's there to advise the minister with specialist skills that officials probably don't have. So it's not there to be a shadow board for the bank. And I've met with the group and the chair a couple of times, and I don't see it as a threat to our operational independence.
Right.
And it was in the Act. The Act said this had to happen, and so it had to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm confident that it is not in any way getting in the way of what we're doing.
One last question, from your indulgence. It would be wrong of me not to raise this, particularly on a day when all the committee members present are male. All our female committee members are not with us today, which is a great pity, because I know if Michelle Thompson were here, she would want me to ask you about the issue of female-led companies, because on innovation investment, and we are now going back on additionality, really, because this is a traditional problem. These innovation businesses that are led by women struggle to raise capital, and that has fallen from SNP. Just to 4.2% of the investment monies, 4.2% in 2024. What is happening there? What's going wrong there? How can we remedy that? Because clearly 50% plus of the population of this country have more than their fair share of entrepreneurial flair and courage, but they're not getting the funding.
Yeah. Look, it's something that we're acutely aware of, and we're very much focused on. We've been working with Anna Stewart on the whole kind of females founder pathway. We recognise that we're in answer to an earlier question, I said that we're probably moving up the scale-up curve to not invest in the very smallest companies. But what we're trying to do is encourage more female participation in companies at an earlier stage, such that when they get to the size that the bank can invest in them, that there's actually more senior management in that female space. If you look outside of the innovation mission, there is actually a lot more participation by female leaders in our portfolio. And actually, I mean, we prepared some statistics on this. It's over 20% of our committed capital is in companies with significant senior leadership. I think it's a particular problem in the innovation space, and that's something we're going to have to do more work on. But I agree with your premise that it's something that isn't really right. But I think what we can't just do is wait for those female founders to get to a position of maturity and just say, well, it's going to take years, so there's nothing we can do. I think we've got to go down and help with developing skills, building networks.
When you say we, do you mean the bank?
Yeah. Building networks, developing skills, and encouraging women to found businesses and go on that scale-up journey. The bank executive who runs our whole innovation space is a woman, and she's completely committed to this.
You were talking in future tense in terms of the going back and giving that support.
Yeah.
It's not something you currently do.
No, it is.
Oh, it is something.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah. We've there was quite recently a female founders growth summit which we sponsored. We're 200 female business leaders at that. We've partnered with the Employer Network for Equality and Inclusion to try and make people aware of what the bank does who are in less well represented groups. We're working with Anna Stewart on this kind of Pathways Pledge, which is something that she is doing to effectively create a pathway through recognising this point. So we're already doing all of that. We're updating our data collection to capture more information about this. And we're looking at our investment processes to make sure there's nothing in the way that we're looking at businesses which has got unintentional bias. I mean, there's no intentional bias, but there can be unintentional bias. But but women are well represented in the team that does the innovation investing, as I was saying earlier on, they're really committed to this.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener.
I'd like to hand to Gordon MacDonald.
Much, Convener, and good morning.
Morning.
Some of the questioning I was going to ask has already been covered, but I've got a few follow-up points. So, talking about the ambition for you to be a perpetual investment fund, you've talked about you want to try and achieve some progress over the next 12 months. Yeah. Is there any requirement for rule changes, either in the bank's constitution or in the governance rules, in order for that to happen?
I think there's a shareholder framework document that governs the relationship between the bank and the Scottish Government, and that might well have to change. The act that set the bank up only envisages finance coming from the Scottish Government. So I think we would need to sit down with the shareholder team and with the Deputy First Minister and work out whether there was any need for any secondary legislation associated with it. And I think there is probably a requirement for the Scottish Government and the Treasury to look at the allocation of capital in the devolution settlement, and I know that those discussions are taking place.
Okay.
So there's probably a bit of work.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much for that. In terms of the Scottish Government's reserve, I believe they gave you a bit of flexibility, £25 million. How does that benefit the organisation?
It's incredibly important because at the moment we're allocated a capital sum to invest through financial transactions, and we can't go a pound over that number. And so as we get closer to the year end, we have to make judgments about what we can invest in, because we can't ever go above it. So what that means is we're always below it, because we've got to be structurally below it. The other thing that happens is that this year we had quite a big investment that was in its later stages, coming to completion, and we found out things about the investment that meant we didn't want to we didn't want to complete it. So we had to pull out of that, but we couldn't then replace it with anything because it was so close to the year end. So the 25 million helps us to bridge that gap, and you know, we don't think it's the full solution to all the issues we've got, but it's been a very helpful addition.
Okay. I mean, it can also help in the situation there's a return of capital. So, you know, that would also constitute an underspend technically. So in those situations, it could be useful at the point in time that the bank is at the moment. In a few years, it may not be sufficient to enable that movement between years, if you like.
Okay. So another question about your risk appetite. So first of all, I welcome your investment of, I think, £34 million into Lost Shore, Scotland's only resort, surf resort, which is in my constituency, which is a fantastic facility.
Yeah.
And then we heard from Murdo Fraser about Gresham House.
Yeah.
I think it's £50 million you're putting at Gresham House. How do you decide which projects you're invested in? I mean, we're already 70% of all trees planted in the UK are being planted in Scotland. So how do you decide where your risk appetite is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we look at that on a number of different criteria. So I think the first thing to say is that what we are seeking to build for the people of Scotland is a £2 billion balance sheet that's got a broad risk return basis. So the Gresham Trust investment is at the less riskier end of what we do. We lent money to Aberdeen Harbour, and that was probably at the less risky end of what we do. And then you mentioned Lost Shore. It was incredibly risky before it had been built, but it's somewhat less risky now. So what we're looking at is the overall risk profile of each individual investment, and then we're piecing them together to produce an overall return which we think over the 10-year period could deliver 3 or 4%. We then look at each mission, so you know, place, net zero and innovation, and we want to kind of right size each of those. So we don't want them to get grossly out of balance. And so at the moment, I think it's about 40 or 50% net zero, and the other two are broadly similar. I think if innovation got too big, it would have too much risk in the portfolio, because a lot of the outcomes in innovation are binary. It'll either be a great success or it won't. The challenges with net zero are around how quickly offshore wind will be developed and how much of the supply chain will be in Scotland. And so we're looking at those bottom up and then those top down elements, and then we're trying to work out what our track record in each area is. The good thing is that because we've only deployed, we would like to have deployed more, but we've deployed 800 million, so that's about 40% of the total. We've still got 60% of the total where we can, if you like, nudge towards the outcome that we're looking for. I don't know if that's helpful.
And
If I may as well,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
other
sure.
element of that is the split of the portfolio between debt, equity and
Yeah,
funds,
yeah.
where debt is obviously yielding and supporting our operating expenses in the early years of our creation, so it's important.
Okay. So my last point is about leverage. So to date, you talked about 800 million you've actually invested. You've got back from private capital about 1.4 billion.
Yeah.
It's a leverage ratio between 1.6, 1.8.
Yeah.
How does that compare with other organisations in a
Yeah.
similar space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't want to speculate. I think our leverage ratio is less than the National Wealth Fund. But what I'd like to do, if I may, is write to you with some comparators. I think, but if I step back from the comparison, I would say that we think we need to push the leverage ratio up. It speaks to something I said earlier on about wanting to invest alongside partners, because it makes good business sense to invest alongside other partners, but it also increases the leverage ratio. So it's a win-win thing, and I think it's a very justifiable way in which a development bank should be measured. And so I think that leverage ratio is not as high as it should be, and I think it's something we would like to push up.
And is that because the question asked earlier about your risk assessments? Is it because you're a new bank and it's
maybe.
also risk?
I think it's partly, when we started investing in net zero, for example, it was around the time of COP26. There was a huge amount of interest in that in the private sector, but returns have not been as strong in the net zero space. So there's been a retreat of investment capital. That's impacted it. I think the shortage of capital in the innovation space has meant we've had to do more ourselves. And so sometimes we've been investing with no leverage. Yeah. And of course that brings down the overall ratio. So I think these are things that we can manage, and it's our job to manage them, but they're partly to do with the external environment and partly to do with the risk profile, as you say. Okay, thanks very much.
And I'd like to bring in Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. I was pleased to hear you mention the investment in the Port of Aberdeen. As you said, less risk there. One of the oldest existing businesses, if not the oldest existing business in these islands, having been founded in 1136, but history lesson over. That £1.4 billion of leverage that you've just been speaking about with Gordon MacDonald there, how much of that is private sector money? How much of it may come from the public sector?
The vast majority of it is private. Yeah.
I'm really interested in cooperation.
Yeah.
And obviously there is a lot going on out there. You stated earlier on, Mr. Watt, that for companies, they're delivering on their growth plans, and raising capital at this moment is quite difficult.
Yeah.
Things like the city growth deals, particularly in the North East example, where a huge amount of the investment has been into creating private opportunities. How are you matching with that kind of organisation to ensure that we get the biggest bangs for the buck in terms of public sector investment? Yeah,
one of the constraints we have is that we're not allowed through the Founding Act to invest alongside or into local authorities. Whereas the National Wealth Fund is actually can invest in local authorities. So that is a bit of a constraint. But I was giving an example earlier on about housing on brownfield sites, and there what we're doing to get over that is creating joint venture companies with the private sector and the local authority to develop land, and that's something that we're doing. It's not, I wouldn't call it a pilot, but we're working on the first of those at the moment. But we think that that is a model that could be rolled out across Scotland in lots of different local authority areas.
Not a new thing.
Sorry?
It's not a new thing.
No, but it's the way that well, it's new to us.
New to you.
But obviously joint ventures are not new per se. But it's a way for us to get more involved in placemaking with local authorities. And so with regard to our missions, we've tended to, because of the focus we've got on innovation, place and net zero, we're looking for things in those city deals that we might get involved with that look towards those sorts of priorities.
Okay. Let's look at that constraint around about the local authority aspect. Does that constraint include possible joint development with resourcing from local authority pension funds, for example, in terms of delivering housing?
No, we definitely can work directly with local authority pension funds, and would really be keen to do so.
So has there been any discussion in terms of the formulation of those joint venture companies that you may add in resource and local authorities may add in resource from their pension funds?
I mean, we've had discussions with pension funds about that kind of model, but I'm racking my brains. I don't think there's any. The one that I was talking about, which is the most developed, does not have a local authority pension scheme in the structure, but it certainly could have.
Is that something that you will maybe explore after the line of questioning today? Because personally, as a previous housing minister, I was frustrated at the fact that local authority pension funds were not investing in the likes of housing development here. I think there has been one example in Scotland.
Yeah.
That kind of joint venture with you involved actually helps de-risk that to a degree. Is that something that you will go and explore?
Yes, I mean we are exploring it, and we'll double down on that. When I go back to the office, I'll raise it with the team and make sure that we're make sure that we're focused on that.
In terms of those joint venture companies, how many are you involved in or looking to get involved in at this moment?
Well, there's one that's at a reasonably advanced stage, and then there's various others that are in a pipeline. But some, as you'll know, some of these things take quite a while to come to fruition, and there's a lot of moving parts. So it's something that we're focusing more on. And as I said earlier on, I think the housing bill will help with that, particularly on the affordable housing side.
I'll come back to Bill to Rent probably in a second.
Yeah.
But in terms of your discussions, ongoing discussions around about JVCs, have you actually had discussions with COSLA and COSLA leads in all of this? Are all 32 local authorities aware of your interest in this?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think what we've tended to do is we've tended to work with the willing, and so there are particular local authorities that we've found more receptive. But I think it would be a good idea to through COSLA make all the local authorities aware of our willingness to do that, and I can take that away again as I think a good common sense thing to do. And
in terms of your dealings with the private sector when it comes to to housing. Is there a lot of interest from the private sector and possible investment from yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I was saying in relation to earlier questioning, there's a lot of developments that will go ahead that we won't be involved in at all, that the private sector will just do them, and they might work with local authorities, and, you know, there won't be a role for us at all. But I think there's an interest in working with us. In Scotland, we don't have there's no equivalent of Homes England, as you'll know, given your background. And so as an investing institution, I think we can, in part, play, you know, a role similar to Homes England in terms of being a catalyst for private and public sector to work together. And, you know, I know that the Scottish Government is, you know, in a thoughtful mode about the allocation of capital to housing because of the housing emergency. And, you know, we're in discussions with ministers and officials about whether there could be more capital allocated to the bank outside of our core allocation that could enable us to provide that catalytic role in housing.
Okay. I think, you know, one of the things is, as former minister, before the establishment of SNIB, there used to be a bit of a bum fight to see who was getting financial transactions, which I always wanted for housing. And now it's said by some that, you know, the lack of FT availability is an impediment. But if you are moving towards Housing Place being a national mission, that changes the ball game completely and utterly. In terms of the build to rent sector, you probably heard, or you probably didn't, best if you didn't, heard some of the discussion yesterday in Parliament around about that. What are you going to do? What are you going to be doing in terms of discussion with the build to rent sector to try and gain more investment here in Scotland? And are you going to look at some of the more socially responsible companies who are involved in build to rent to see what they can add in terms of the growth here in Scotland? Yeah.
Well, I certainly think we want to work with the more socially responsible investors, and in housing we look for impacts over and above just the commercial return. So we're looking closely at how affordable different developments are. And what we've done on housing is we allocated a very senior individual to do what we call origination work in the housing space. So it's been her job to get to know all of the affordable housing companies that could invest in Scotland, build relationships with those companies, and then talk to them about what they, you know, what they're doing, what they could do in Scotland. You know, the previous rent controls meant that most of their activity was focused on England. But you know, I think this will now change, and so we're talking. I think we're talking to all the right people in terms of affordable housing. But I think some of the developments that we'll get involved with will be mixed tenure, because I think the housing emergency is more than just an emergency that focuses just on social and affordable. I think structurally we just need to build a lot more houses, and more commercial housing will take the pressure off potentially affordable. So we'll take a mixed tenure approach, but we'll definitely, the focus will be on affordable.
Okay, a mixed tenure approach is the right one to take, in my humble opinion. My final question, and it's moving off of build to rent. Have you had any approaches from housing associations, for example, in terms of mid-market rent and possible investment from yourselves into that sector?
Yes, we have. We have had a number of discussions with housing associations, but at this point, those have not sort of come to fruition.
Is there a reason for that?
I know you were going to ask me that. I'm too far away from it, I think, to answer that question. So we'll write back to you with that. We'll ask our housing team to come back with a proper answer rather than me try and say something that I don't know enough about.
I think we'd be grateful for that if you could.
No, I will definitely do that.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Convener.
I'd like to come in with a supplementary.
Yeah, I did ask when I had my allocated questions about the Ministerial Advisory Group.
Yeah.
And we talked about the independence of operation of the bank.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about that, particularly in relation to the recent changes in the Scottish Government's position on munitions.
Yeah.
Now, the bank's current policies talk about not investing in weapons, but you obviously do work with the defence sector to some degree.
Yeah.
What is the update on your policy following the First Minister? And the reason I'm asking is I'm making a connection between the First Minister's pronouncements and your guidance and policy.
Yeah. We haven't made any investments in munitions historically, but I think our policy could allow us to invest in certain munitions. What it doesn't allow us to do is invest in cluster bombs, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons. And the other thing it doesn't allow us to do is invest in oppressive regimes.
Who are you thinking of?
Well, oppressive regimes would probably, well, does cover, Russia. It would cover Israel. It would cover Myanmar. So
Israel is considered an oppressive regime?
Well, with regard to the war in Gaza, yes.
That is the policy of the bank?
The policy of the bank is that we
Because when John Swinney made his speech about Israel, he specifically mentioned the Scottish National Investment Bank. He announced a policy.
Yeah, he did.
So how does that square with our earlier...
Well, my argument to you is that our policy we would not have invested in arms suppliers to Israel, and so what he was stating was something that the bank's policy would not allow anyway. We would not have done that.
You wouldn't have invested previously in a defence company that was exporting arms to Israel?
Directly to Israel. I don't think we would, no.
You don't think you would have?
Yes.
Was that your policy, not to trade, not to support investment?
The policy... The policy talks about particular types of regimes. We then would need to map across whether Israel is one of those regimes. But to be honest with you, it's not come up as an issue, so we've never had to test it.
Will the policy, I suppose my question is the policy of the bank framed by what the First Minister announces? Or are you totally independent and set your own policies?
Well, the policy of the bank is the policy of the bank. The Scottish Government is the shareholder in the bank, and we certainly take into account the Scottish Government's views on these matters, and we would talk to them about it. And they could persuade us that a particular view on something is correct, and we would adapt our policy. But it's still our policy, and we own that policy as a board. And the Scottish Government doesn't own that policy. We own it. But, of course, we're going to take note of what government requires in terms of things like the subject we're talking about.
Right, okay. Will this current policy be updated? Will the current policy be updated in the light, then, of the shareholders' statements about munitions?
I think we should review the policy. I'm not sure it needs updating, but I think, because I think the things that the First Minister is saying are things that are already covered by the policy.
Right.
I just wonder if I could ask just a couple of questions, just following on from some of the answers. First of all, you've alluded to kind of the work that you've been doing alongside the National Wealth Fund and the British Business Bank, mainly to do with the Treasury rules, but it does actually beg another question of actually how you work operationally with them. And I gather from some of the informal discussions I had that you do. I just wondered if you could outline, because ultimately we want public money to be working in consort, not in pulling in different directions. I just wondered if you could outline your approach to working with other bodies such as those.
Yes, I mean, we have to work closely with them. We and they are technocratic organisations. So it's not about politics. It's about, as you say, working together for the best outcome for, in our case, the people of Scotland. So I'll give you an example of Ardersier, where we brought the National Wealth Fund into Ardersier because we didn't have a big enough balance sheet to do all of it ourselves. In Ayrshire, in Hunterston, a company called HICC, they brought us into that because they wanted us to be involved with that. We have a memorandum of understanding with the National Wealth Fund, which works to do exactly as you say, and there's contact at every level within their bank and ours. You know, Michael talks to the CFO, CEOs talk to each other, the investment teams talk to each other. So that works really well. We're trying to build the same relationship with GB Energy. Obviously, a much newer organisation just set up. So, but we are anticipating having the same relationship with them. The British Business Bank, we also have a really good relationship with. Their role in Scotland has been to invest in funds to kind of upgrade the local commercial capability. So we've worked with them on that, and but they've now got more direct investment capability. So we're having discussions with them on how we and they can work together on that.
I mean, are there any lessons from the British Business Bank? I mean, given that they've got a very different model in terms of funding funds and therefore not making the direct investment decisions, but actually seeking to, as it were, de-risk. Are there any lessons to be learned from that model for Scottish?
Yes, I mean, I think funding funds is something we do, and I think we invested, for example, in the PAR Institutional Fund. And that was because we wanted to develop Scotland's capability in scale-up funding. So we did that, and we've invested in affordable housing fund and in an onshore wind development fund. So the challenge with Scotland, from a funds point of view, is it's quite a small country. And so most funds might be Europe-wide or UK-wide. So it's easier for the BBB to do it on a UK-wide basis than it is for us to do it on a Scotland basis because of the scale. But certainly there are things we can learn from them, and that's one of the reasons why we talk to them.
And can I ask just one final question that's occurred to me while you've been providing your answers, which have been varied and broad. We've managed to cover everything from kind of investment strategy to housing to Israel, Gaza. It has been quite spread. What strikes me is that you, Mr. Watt, are very close to the operational decisions, and that might be a necessity because of the number of chief executives you've had. But ultimately, one wants a division between the chair and the chief executive, and for the chair to have a broader view of strategy and be less proximate to the operation. Is there a risk, that your role is too close to the operational and kind of management decisions that the bank is making. And I mean, that might have been necessitated because of the change of chief executives, but it just strikes me that that's a question that needs to be asked in the interest of corporate governance.
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. And I think if I didn't ask that of myself, and if we as a board didn't ask it of ourselves, I don't think we'd be doing our jobs properly. I think I think the board provides good governance, and I think I am able to thread the needle on that challenge. But I think it's a perfectly legitimate one, and I think my involvement is a lot less than it was a few years ago, and I just happen to have a lot of if you like, retained knowledge about the bank because I've been involved with it, a year before it was launched, and I'm, so I'm an investment person by, it's in my DNA. So I'm completely committed to the bank being a success. But our job is to scrutinise the bank, and we need to make sure that that those lines are properly policed.
Well, with that, I think we will draw our questions to a close. Can I thank you both for attending this morning and providing such full answers? And with that, I now move into private session.
Thank you.